Hello, and welcome to The Queer Gaze, where we dissect queer media from every country, complete with nuanced discussion of representation and issues.
This season, we've organised our titles by theme, and we'll be comparing popular, well-known films with lesser-known titles.
You can support The Queer Gaze at patreon.com/thequeergaze, where you'll get early access to episodes and extra content.
And you can follow us on social media at The Queer Gaze. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Conrad. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, although I was a little bit taken aback by our selection for today's episode.
Yeah. So we're still talking about one-night stands, and we're on the other side of the equation from Weekend, which I'm going to argue is probably still better known than this title. But Conrad, what are we talking about today?
Well, we're talking about the French 2016 erotic romantic drama Paris 0559, Théo and Hugo, or in its original French title, Théo et Hugo dans le même bateau. So Théo and Hugo in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So interesting title. It is written and directed by a partnership of writers-directors,
Yep.
Olivier Ducastel and Jacques Martineau, who I was surprised to discover were in their 60s when they made this film.
Mm-hmm.
And it stars Geoffrey Couët and François Nambot, none of whom I had ever heard of before. So, yeah, this was a complete discovery for me. Never seen this film before. You had, I think.
I had, yeah. I can't remember if I saw it in a festival. It was definitely a digital screener for me, but I have a review because I went back and read it just to see if my thoughts had changed. Oh boy, never go back and reread yourself because it's nothing but spelling mistakes and improperly formed sentence structures. But yeah, it's interesting because you made a very slight offhand remark of, oh, this is a erotic romantic drama. And I do think that this film becomes well known in certain circles, like in queer media circles, because it has a very provocative opening.
Just slightly, yes. Openings is the phrase. So there is a 20-minute sequence at the beginning of this film that is, I think it's fair to say, largely dialogue-free.
Yes, it's entirely dialogue-free.
Yeah. And it takes place in a sex club, and it is all about the dynamics of the meeting between our two characters, and we observe them in this space, and we observe them apart, and then we observe them. They have their meet cute moment.
I saw it referred to as a fuck cute on a couple of different reviews.
Their eyes meet in the most engaging of circumstances, yes. So it is a very striking scene. It is very explicit. We will talk about it in greater detail in the Patreon bonus episode when we get to the Chili Pepper Award. But I did find it just visually incredibly striking. It's lit very strongly in vibrant primary colors, blues and reds. And then when our couple come together for the first time, quite literally, it shifts suddenly to a white spotlight, which I believe is not something that is happening in the...
It's not real, per se.
It's not real, no. It's their experience of that moment. So yeah, so it's very visually expressive and fascinating in terms of its form.
Absolutely, yes. Hey, Conrad, did you realize what the colors of the French flag are from this scene?
Well, yeah, it's a different take on three colors, red, white, and blue, isn't it?
Actually, I wanted to give a little bit of credit because when I was doing research on the film, there's not a ton about this. Like if you hit the Wikipedia page, you won't even really understand what the film is apart from the fact that it is all in one night. In fact, it's only in a couple of hours. It's almost a real time kind of film. But if you read a couple of the reviews on Rotten Tomato, there's some interesting comparisons. So I did see that people feel like these opening titles evoke Enter the Void, which is Gaspar Noé's film, as well as Une femme et une femme. And then the numeric title. So we'll get into kind of what it means within the world of the film, because it is, yes, like the minute before 6 o'clock, and that's where the movie ends. But some people also think that this may be referencing Agnes Varda's Cleo from 5 to 7.
Yes, which I watched an interview with the cast and the two directors, writer-directors, and they did cite Agnes Varda's movie, which I think was recently voted by a BBC panel of film critics as the second best film directed by a woman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm actually ashamed to admit I have not seen any of Agnes Varda's films.
No, I haven't seen it either. So it's part of the French New Wave, very much from that era of the camera being off the tripod and on the streets in real locations, that cinema verite style, which of course this film also emulates. So although I was thinking of that, I was also thinking of Richard Linklater's 1995 film, which we've mentioned before in the context of our One Night Stands, which is Before Sunrise. And I really got more of a vibe of Before Sunrise, because after Théo and Hugo's meet cute or fuck cute in the sex club,
thank you,
they then spend the rest of the evening walking Paris at night together.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more of the meandering but profound conversations. Shifting from the banal and the everyday to the profound, and going on a journey as these characters get to know each other, sort of on the reverse dynamic to the one you would usually get in a film, including Before Sunrise, where they consummate their relationship at the end. The film doesn't show a great deal of it, to this version where they consummate within
immediately.
10 minutes, and you get to see a lot of it. And we slowly go in the other direction and learn who they are as people and how they will interact with each other in a very different situation.
Yeah. I'm not going to say that this is a quintessential queer film, but in terms of my experiences watching predominantly at film festivals, like either queer film festivals or within programming blocks at more mainstream film festivals, I feel like this is quite representative of the kinds of films that you'll see where it is a bit daring, it's audacious, like to open a film with an extended, explicit, unsimulated sex scene, big ass deal. But I also feel like it kind of traverses that terrain that I was talking about a bit in Weekend, where it's like front load the film with the dirty bits that people want to see, and then you've got them and it's out of the way. Like if you can get through the opening 20 minutes of this movie and not turn it off because you're incensed, or you're like, oh, maybe it's just not for me, or maybe not right now, then what follows is this really lovely, deeply romantic, just kind of not languid, because I think that has a weird connotation, but it is serene. Like it's kind of lovely to just watch these two boys explore Paris at night.
Yes, and I think you're right in trying to capture that same that interesting vibe that these movies manage to capture, which is two people who are outside the daily routine that we would be very familiar with.
Yes.
They've kind of jumped the groove on the vinyl, and they're just floating in this liminal space between everybody else's daily lives, wandering around the town. And it's quite fun to see them do the same thing they do in Before Sunrise, where they bump into characters along the way and just spend a moment with them talking about them and their lives. And for some reason, I don't know if this is just Paris, they seem to be people that are very open about just telling a complete stranger something incredibly personal about themselves or profound about themselves. But I found that really enjoyable.
Yeah, I did see a couple of reviews who suggested that because of the very specific time frame that this is taking place in, like it's basically 4:45 through to 6 a.m., you're meeting people from a completely different walk of life. And as a result, yes, they may be more inclined to being open, being conversational, in part because for many of these people, their day is just starting. Whereas, of course, with these boys, it's the end of their night. But the whole film is actually about the origin of their relationship, right? The movie ends by saying, and now let's begin, as in the romance has begun and real life can begin because we're going to be together for the next 20 years.
Yes. I think it's Hugo who says that we'll split up after 20 years.
Yes.
So it's either cynical or it's realistic or whichever way you want to see that. Glass half full, half empty.
Why not both?
Yeah, it's quite endearing. But it's interesting that there are some stakes to this movie. So
yes, I'm curious because I will confess sometimes this gets classified as like an AIDS or an HIV film. And I was kind of hoping that you would be taken by surprise by this. Like you wouldn't have discovered it until it happens within the world of the film.
Yes. No, I was taken by surprise in a lot of ways watching this movie, Joe.
I prepared you for nothing.
No, yes, I have a bone to pick with you about that, or a boner perhaps, but
I was going to say a boner, multiple.
Yeah, so much like Cleo from 5 to 7, spoilers alert, in that movie, the main character is waiting for the results of a biopsy that could possibly confirm a diagnosis of stomach cancer.
Okay.
According to Wikipedia. This movie has our main characters sitting in a hospital, not necessarily waiting for a diagnosis as such, but they're waiting for emergency treatment because, whoopsie, as I scribbled down in my notes while I was watching the opening 20-minute sequence, I think Theo's doing something here that he should not be doing. And yes, he is, because it turns out he's had unprotected sex with Hugo, and that was not wise because Hugo is HIV positive.
He is indeed, yeah. And it's interesting because there's even a moment during the underground sex club sequence, we very clearly see signs posted on the wall that say, here is the condom, here is the lube, you are encouraged to have safe sex. And I'll confess, I completely forgot that this is how the interaction goes. So when later on, they're on the bikes and they say, yeah, that was a unique experience for me. Wait, what do you mean it was unique? Wait, you didn't use it? Oh my fucking God, you didn't use a condom. And then the whole movie, and quite literally in the world of the film, we screech to a stop so that we can get a full-blown meltdown. And then the movie changes pace, right? Because all of a sudden then it becomes, okay, we have to address this right now.
Yeah, and it becomes tense, it becomes fraught. It seems like perhaps our two characters will go their separate ways with a cloud hanging above them. But instead it switches, and it's strange. You go through this stages of coming to terms with it in a very short space of time, because initially it's sort of disbelief and almost disregard for it, and then it starts to sink in, and then we get to see Hugo comforting Theo and looking after him, and all of a sudden their relationship turns into something that's very caring and affectionate, which is just so beautiful to watch and so well performed as well. It has to be said, the two leads are
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a real connection between the two of them.
I do think what's interesting, and it goes a little unsaid over the course of the film, but I'm not fully convinced that these two would have something more than another sexual encounter. Like, they leave the club together with, I think, the purposes of retiring to one of their two houses to maybe have another round, or, they might have gotten something quick to eat. But without the health scare, I don't know that they would have continued to spend a significant amount of time or thought about their future. Like, the event ultimately ends up forcing them to spend a significant amount of deep, meaningful time. Like, opening of the film, no dialogue. We're not communicating in that way. Rest of the film, all dialogue. We only communicate that way until the very end. But I often read this as they probably would have gone their separate ways had not they had to endure this together. And because they spend all this time together, they get to know each other, they like each other, they realize we should give this a go.
Yeah, they get to know each other at the most vulnerable moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the nature of their conversation changes because in the immediate aftermath, as they emerge from the club, their conversation is very sexually playful.
Yes.
It's very much about the experience they've just had. And
I really liked your penis. Your penis is perfect.
There's a lot of penis worship in this movie. Yeah. And it's the nature of their conversations change drastically.
Yeah.
After that, but not in a way that undermines their attraction to each other.
No. I mean, at times we do get into tiffs. Like, we're not always happy-go-lucky, and I did kind of like that because especially when you don't know everything about somebody, it can be a game of walking on pins and needles to try to make sure you're not upsetting the other person. But this situation is so emotionally fraught that of course they would say the wrong thing. They don't know the other person. They don't know what might set them off. And I really like that there are those moments of friction because it felt all the more honest to me.
Yeah, very much so. No, I enjoyed that. And it was full of quirky details and memorable quotes. Things like Hugo talking about his experience of living with HIV, saying, I live against it, not with it, which I thought was really interesting. And just quotable lines like, the night belongs to women and fags.
Yes. I don't always love the S slur, but there's something powerful about that. And truly this movie does, right? Like, I think we encounter two other male characters. So there's the man in the hospital waiting room, and he's very much played as a gently homophobic, but also like it's a comedy beat, right? Because he just will not let up about the fact that they are using a cell phone in a place where you are not meant to have one. And I think the movie minds an appropriate amount of comedy, and we do actually have the characters get a laugh out of that. And then we also have the Syrian refugee or student who works in the kebab shop. But like the woman on the bus, this is more of a slice of life, not quite a centric character, but a character.
Yeah, it's something that's fun to enjoy, but it's also strangely memorable and oddly sad and poignant in its own way.
Yeah. I did also want to bring in, because you've talked, I think, more about Hugo than you have about Theo. And I think that's in part because Hugo is deeply romantic, but also prone to making these grand declarations. Like, he seems very sure of himself, whereas I think Theo is more, I don't know, I get the impression he's younger and still trying to find himself. Like, he's the one who doesn't know what he wants to do in life. He wants to be an aid worker, but that's not the field he's working in. And he seems open to life and living, to the point where you think, oh, yeah, maybe that's why he decided to have unprotected sex without saying something in the club. But Hugo does reference Balzac's novel, The Seamy Side of History. And when I was reading some of these reviews, I read Dave White's review for The Wrap. And just in case people don't know, The Seamy Side of History is about a group of men who are traumatized by war, who live monastically, performing anonymous acts of charity. And in White's reading of the film, he says, Theo and Hugo, similarly, though decidedly not monk-like, meet in a place where names are irrelevant and become private caretakers of each other's well-being anyway. It's as truly romantic and morally unselfish as it is defiantly dirty.
Ah, yeah, that's a fascinating take. Yes, Balzac is not somebody that I'm terribly familiar with, so that is very useful.
I am not hyper literate in the classics at all.
No, me neither. Yeah, I get what you're saying. You almost emerge from the film feeling as though Theo is under-characterized in comparison with Hugo, but I don't think that's fair necessarily. I think Hugo is much more outgoing, and he feels as though he is someone who has to define himself in defiance of adversity, whereas Theo is just floating along. I don't think he has faced an awful lot of adversity.
Right, which is what this whole film is ultimately about, right? Like, it's him getting this crash course into the realities of life with a guide who can say, let me tell you what it's like.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that both of them are silenced by the Syrian student in the kebab shop because they really have nothing to say to this man other than to listen.
It did remind me of that moment from A Moment in the Reeds where we talk about, that main character who is Finnish has not lived a life of any kind of hardship, right? He went off to university and he's studying, and then he encounters this man who has fled war. And it's interesting because, I'm thinking about the geography of Europe and how close all of your countries are near each other, right? So like here in Canada, it would be a big deal to go from one country to another because those are big countries to navigate. Whereas over in Europe, you can really make a lot of headway in just a short amount of time, barring the right passports and papers and all that kind of stuff. But it struck me how much the events in Syria around this time were popping up in different national movies, right? Because we talked about, okay, one is Finland, and then this is France. And I guess it's a testament to not just the close proximity, but also how war displaces people.
Yeah, throughout the European Union, not so much the UK because...
Wow, you folks like to close your borders down.
Apparently, yeah. Or at least raise a thin majority of them do, and that's why we're in the mess we're in now. But besides that...
yeah. I guess it's partially relevant, if only because we are talking about movies made within about a year of each other, right? So we don't see it in Weekend because Weekend is so closed off. It truly does feel like, okay, we're the UK island nation. We're not going to address those kinds of things. But France, we know, does have a very high population of refugees from a number of different countries. And then I guess... I confess I don't know enough about Finland, but it makes sense because these are movies that were made in 2016, 2017.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting to see them crop up in both.
Wow.
Another thing that fascinated me about the movie is the form of the movie. So, much like Weekend and A Moment in the Reeds, it's handheld camera. It's behind the shoulder of the characters a lot of the time, but it does give itself over to moments of expressionism, aside from the opening 20 minutes, which is, bravura sequence in and of itself. But there are moments of expressionism. I particularly like little things like, I think Hugo calls it the romantic sprint that the pair go on. Really thrilling. And also the moment when Theo is coming to terms with what's happened to him and his sudden, how his life has changed all of a sudden. And he starts getting flashbacks to the sex club, but it's all images of people starkly lit from above in red so that their eye sockets are just black and they seem sort of cadaverous.
Yeah.
Very threatening. Yeah.
I did quite like those moments, if only because they stand out by comparison, because everything else, not to say it's bad, but most of the film has the same kind of visual look to it. So when we move away from that, it's very distinct and very obvious. And it's not subtle because it's very clearly trying to make sure that we understand what is happening, like what is the character experiencing or thinking. And I think in other films, I would be less forgiving because I don't like being told what to feel or what to think. But here I actually found it very striking, especially because we are dealing with a film that is talking about HIV and AIDS, which is such a topic within the queer community, specifically around gay men. Obviously we can have conversations down the road about it. I think we're going to talk about this specifically in its own double feature later on. But I found even the images, like when the men are presented in red, it felt like the kinds of warnings that we would have seen back in the heyday of the AIDS epidemic of like, this is your friend and now they're dead.
Yeah, it's possibly inspired by that kind of scaremongering
Mm-hmm.
imagery. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think it was striking, and it's really the only place where it happens. The rest of the movie kind of settles into a different rhythm.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I did appreciate it as well, because otherwise Theo is very closed down. He's not terribly forthcoming at the beginning of the film.
No. Well, we're talking about this, though. There is one other moment. It doesn't call attention to itself in quite the same dramatic light, but there is this moment where we go to meet with the doctor in the emergency room. It's a female doctor, which I appreciated. And she is very empathetic. She's doing all the things that you would want, where she is clinical but understanding. There's this moment where she asked him, like, okay, who was the top and who was the bottom, but of course, because it's France, we're saying passif and agressif. But
Yeah.
like, she asked him if he was tested recently, and he says yes, like, I get tested every couple of months. And she says, what was the results? And he says normal, and she goes negative, because it's like, for her, she needs the confirmation, she needs the appropriate language. But I did love that he said, oh, normal is not infected, as if to suggest being infected is abnormal or out of the ordinary, and so on. But she goes to get him the pills, and when she comes back, she makes him eat, and he's eating this Madeleine, which was like the most fucking French thing you could give someone to take before their AIDS medication. But it's a long take, so we just fix the camera on him while she goes to get the pills, comes back, gives them to him, and we have to watch him just eat the Madeleine, and then take the pills, drink the water, take more of the pills, drink the water. And you have to sit in that discomfort. Like, I kept wanting an edit to break the tension, because it was so uncomfortable. And instead it was like, no, this is what your life would be like, a pill cocktail multiple times a day, taken preferably with food, for 28 days, for however many years that Hugo has been infected. And it just really lets you sit with the realities of that situation.
Yeah, it does. It's very effective and very instructive for me, because it's not something that I have seen depicted before, and not
No.
something that I know a great deal about.
Like, I don't want to belabor Philadelphia to the point where I feel like we probably owe listeners an opportunity to hear us talk about that film, like revisit it, have the conversation, and so on. But like, in narratives that deal with AIDS, because we hear it so fucking often. Like, it's always the topic lurking in so many queer films. But I feel like it's always, oh, well, you're going to wither away, you're going to die, your friends are going to cry, and this kind of stuff. It's not, here's how you would negotiate it. This is how you would live with it. These are the kinds of conversations you would have about it. And I'm just so appreciative of this very candid, very realistic, but also, like, I'm not shying away how bad this is kind of film, as opposed to going for melodrama, going for sensationalism.
Yeah. No, I was surprised how matter of fact it was being treated in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
How it was just a functional factor of daily life, and something
Mm-hmm.
that, okay, Hugo says he lives against it, but something that you have to live with, and you have to have lots of practical
Yep.
considerations in order to accommodate this. And how Theo suddenly realizes that his dream of being an unspecified aid worker helping an unspecified group of people, which he realizes is just faintly romantic and wistful and not very focused
Mm-hmm.
of him, may well be dashed because of this change in his circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something so powerful about the idea that they had this one single encounter, and it changes their life in a myriad of ways, right? Be it romantic, be it sexual, but also now the other elephant in the room is, you may have just condemned yourself to a life of having to negotiate and still maybe die. Like, in 2017, there was no cure. Like, we were just getting to the cusp of now saying we might be curing people of the disease, but it's still in tests. Like, even 7-8 years ago, it was like, no, you could die from this if you don't manage it carefully.
Yeah, exactly. Although I think in retrospect, the chances are that Theo probably has not contracted it.
Yeah. I mean, we do spend a fair amount of time talking about Hugo's viral load and how he probably isn't in danger of transmitting it, and particularly because he was passif as opposed to aggressive. But I liked hearing all of those conversations, and as you said, it's candid, it's matter of factly, it is a little bit clinical, but just direct, and it feels like the temptation is always to make it so much more dramatic because the stakes are life and death or life changing. And this movie says, no, people are going to understand that. And that's not the only story we're trying to tell.
Yeah. And not shrouding it in some way, because a lot of these melodramatic things, because you're looking so much at how much people are affected by it and the emotions and over the top makeup depictions of what people will look like and so on. We're actually throwing a veil over the practical implications of these things, whereas this just gets right down and dirty with it and just tells you as it is.
I feel like the subtitle for this film could be Down and Dirty.
Quite literally, yeah. Rather than In the Same Boat.
Well, I mean, the title is apt, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder, would you like to jump over to Patreon so that we can have a conversation about the sex scenes, as well as maybe some of the things that the film is not treating with the same level of seriousness and so on?
Yep, I think we can. But
okay,
we can close this out by saying that having never seen this before, I enjoyed it a great deal. I thought it was marvelous, although I was not moved by it in the same way as I was Weekend.
Yes, okay, let's unpack that on the other side. So folks, once again, patreon.com, The Queer Gaze. And I'm curious to have a more fulsome conversation about the romance versus sex discussion.